Richmond-bound train. Doors closed, stand clear.
Welcome to Train Hot Dog, the podcast where I talk about stuff on train rides in general, I guess. Today we're going to be reading A Trip Through the Graphics Pipeline by Rigorous. This is an 11-part series. We'll see how far we can get on this ride. A Trip Through the Graphics Pipeline 2011, Part 1. It's been a while since I posted something here, and I figured I might use this spot to explain some general points about graphics hardware and software as of 2011. You can find functional descriptions of what the graphics stack on your PC does, but usually not the how or why. I'll try to follow the links without getting too specific about any particular piece of hardware. I'm mostly going to be talking about DX11 class hardware running D3D9 1011 on Windows, because that happens to be the PC stack I'm most familiar with. Not the API details will never much past this first part. Once we're actually on the GPU, it's all native commands. The application. This is your code. These are also your bugs. Really, yes. The API runtime and the driver have bugs, but this is not one of them. We'll fix it already. The API runtime. You make your resource creation / state setting / draw calls to the API. The API runtime keeps track of the current state your app is set, various parameters, and all other elements of the consistency checking, management users and their resources, monitoring net value, shader code, and zero linkage, or at least D3D does, and OpenGL can handle the driver level. Maybe batches work some more, then hands it all over to the graphics driver, more precisely the user mode driver. The user mode graphics driver, or UMD. This is where most of the magic on the CPU side happens. If your app crashes after some API call you did, it'll probably be here, smiley face. It's called NVD3DUM.dll NVIDIA, or ATIUMD_star.dll AMD. As the name suggests, this is user mode code. It's running in the same context and address space as your app in the API runtime, and has no elevated privileges whatsoever. It implements a lower-level API, the DDI, that is called by D3D. This API is fairly similar to the one you're seeing on the surface, but a bit more explicit about things like memory management and such. This module is where things like shader compilation happen. D3D passes a pre-validated shader token stream to UMD, i.e. it's already checked that the code is valid in the sense of being syntactically correct when obeying D3D constants, meaning that types not using more textures or samplers than available, not exceeding the number of available constant buffers, stuff like that. This is compiled from HLSL code, and it usually has quite a number of high-level optimizations, various loop implementations, code elimination, constant propagation, predicating ifs, etc. applied to it. This is good news, since it means the driver benefits from all those relatively costly optimizations and particularly compile time. However, it also has a bunch of low-level optimizations, such as bonus allocation and loop bundling, applied to drivers that just rather do themselves. Long story short, this usually just gets immediately turned into an intermediate representation, IR, and then compiled some more. Shader hardware is close enough to the D3D bytecode that compilation doesn't need to work wonders to give good results, and the HLSL compiler having done some of the high yield and high cost optimizations already definitely helps. But there's still lots of low-level details such as the hardware resource limits and scheduling constraints that D3D neither knows nor cares about, so this is not a trivial process. And of course, if your app is a well-known game, programmers at NVIDIA and AMD have probably looked at your shaders and written hand-optimized replacements for their hardware, so they better produce the same results lest there be scandal, smiley face. These shaders get detected and substituted by UMD2. You're welcome. More fun, some of the API state may actually end up being compiled into the shader. Give an example, relatively exotic, or at least infrequently used features, such as texture borders, are probably not implemented in the texture sampler, but emulated with extra code in the shader, or just not supported at all. This means that there's sometimes multiple versions of the same shader floating around for different combinations of API states. Incidentally, this is also the reason you'll often see a delay the first time you use a new shader or resource. A lot of the creation/compilation work is deferred by the driver and only executed when it's actually necessary. You wouldn't believe how much unused crap some apps create. Graphics programmers know the other side of the story. If you want to make sure something is actually created, as opposed to just having memory reserved, you need to issue a dummy draw call that uses it to warm it up. Ugly and annoying, but this has been the case since I first started using 3D hardware in 1999, meaning it's pretty much a fact of life by this point, so get used to it. Smiley face. Moving on, the UMD also gets to deal with fun stuff like all the D3D9 legacy shader versions in the fixed function pipeline. Yes, all of that stuff will get faithfully passed through by D3D. The 3.0 shader profile ain't that bad, it's quite reasonable in fact. But 2.0 is crufty and the various 1.x shader versions are seriously whack. Remember 1.3 pixel shaders? Or for that matter, the fixed function vertex pipeline with vertex lighting and such? Yeah, support for that is all still there in the D3D and the guts of every modern graphics driver. Though of course they just translated it to newer shader versions by now, and have been doing so for quite some time. Other things like memory management. The UMD will get things like substitution commands and provide space for them. Actually, the UMD just sub-allocates some larger memory blocks to get some UMD kernel mode driver, actually mapping and unmapping pages, and managing part of the field of the UMD can see, and versus the parts of the system may access, is a kernel mode privilege you can't be done with UMD. But UMD can do things like swizzling textures, unless the GPU can do this in hardware, usually using 2D blitting nets and a real 3D pipeline. And schedule transfer between system memory and mapped video memory and the like. Most importantly, you can also write command buffers, or DMA buffers. I'll be using these two names interchangeably once the KMD is allocated and handed them over. The command buffer contains, well, commands. Smiley face. All your state-changing and general operations will be converted by the UMD into commands that the hardware understands. As will a lot of things you don't trigger manually, such as uploading textures and shaders for video memory. In general, drivers will try to put as much of the actual processing into the UMD as possible. The UMD is user mode code, so anything that runs in it doesn't need any costly kernel mode transitions. It can freely allocate memory, farm work out to multiple threads, and so on. This is a regular DLL, even though it's loaded by the API, not directly by your app. This has advantages for driver development too. If UMD crashes, the app crashes with it, but not the whole system. It can just be replaced while the system is running. It's just a DLL. It can be debugged with a regular debugger and so on. Where it's not only efficient, it's also convenient. But there's a big elephant in the room I haven't mentioned yet. Did I say user mode driver? I meant user mode drivers. As said, the UMD is just a DLL. One that happens to have the blessing of D3D and the direct pipe to the KMD, but still regular DLL. And it runs in the address space of its calling process. We're using some multitasking OSs nowadays. In fact, we have been for some time. This GPU thing I keep talking about, it's a shared resource. There's only one that drives your main display, even if you include CLI/DOSFire. And we have multiple apps to try to access it, and manually the only one doing it. The system just worked automatically. Back in the olden days, the solution was to only give 3D to one app at a time, and while that app was active, all the others wouldn't have access. But it's not really clever if you're trying to have your windowing system use the GPU for rendering, which is why you need some component that arbitrates access to the GPU and allocates time slices. So the scheduler. This is a system component. Note the is somewhat misleading. I'm talking about the graphics scheduler here, not the CPU or I/O schedulers. This does exactly what you think it does. It arbitrates access to the 3D pipeline by time slicing it between different apps that want to use it. A context switch incurs, at the very least, some state switching on the GPU, which generates extra commands for the command buffer, and possibly also swapping some resources in and out of video memory. And of course, only one process gets it to actually submit commands to the 3D pipe at any given time. You'll often find console programmers complaining about the fairly high-level hands-off nature of PC 3D APIs and the performance cost this incurs. But the thing is that 3D APIs/drivers in the PC really have more complex problems to solve in console games. They really do need to keep track of the full current state, for example, since someone might pull the metaphorical rug out from under them at any moment. They also work around broken apps and try to fix performance problems behind their backs. They're rather common practice as an example that certainly including the drivers around the applications themselves. In fact, there's a bunch of things here. Kernel mode driver. This is the part that actually deals with the hardware. There may be multiple it off. The KMB deals with all the things that are just there once. There's only one GPU memory, even though there's multiple apps fighting over it. Someone needs to call all the shots and actually allocate and map physical memory. Similarly, someone must initialize the GPU at startup, set display modes, and get more information from displays, manage the hardware mouse cursor. Yes, there's hardware handling for this, and yes, you really only get one. Program the hardware watchdog timer so the GPU gets reset if it stays unresponsive for a certain amount of time, respond to interrupts, and so on. That's what the KMB does. There's also this whole content protection / DRM bit about setting up a protected DRM path between a video player and GPU. So no, the actual preciously coded video pixels aren't visible to any user mode code. It might do awful forbidden things like dump them or disk. The KMD has some involvement in that too. But most importantly for us, the KMD manages the actual command buffer. You know, the one that the hardware actually consumes. The command buffers that the UMB produces aren't the real deal. As a matter of fact, they're just random slices of GPU addressable memory. What actually happens is then the UMB finishes them and submits them to the scheduler, which then waits until that process is up, and then passes the UMB command buffer onto the KMD. The KMD then writes the call to the command buffer into the main command buffer, and depending on whether the GPU command processor can read it from main memory or not, it may also need to DMA it to video memory first. The main command buffer is usually a quite small ring buffer. The only thing that ever gets written there is system initialization commands and calls to the real meaty 3D command buffers. But this is still just a buffer in memory right now. Its position is not there's usually a read pointer, which is there when the GPU is in the main command buffer, and a write pointer, which is how far the KMB is written to the buffer yet. And more precisely, how far it is told the GPU is written.
Stand clear of the doors.
These are hardware registers, and they are memory mapped. The KMB updates them periodically, usually whenever it submits a new chunk of work. The bus. But of course that write doesn't go directly to the graphics card, at least unless it's integrated on the CPU die, since it needs to go through the bus first. Usually PCI Express DMA transfers, etc. take the same route. This doesn't take very long, but it's yet another stage on our journey, until finally, the command processor. This is the front end of the GPU, the part that actually reads the commands the KMB writes. I'll continue from here in the next installment, since this process is not done already. Small aside, OpenGL. OpenGL is fairly similar to what I just described, except there's not a sharper distinction between the API and the UMB layer. And unlike V3D, the GLSL shader compilation is not handled by the API at all, it's all done by the driver. The unfortunate side effect is that there are as many GLSL front-ends as there are 3D hardware vendors, all of them basically implementing the same spec with their own bugs and idiosyncrasies. That's fun. It also means the drivers have to do all the optimization themselves whenever they get to see the shaders, including expensive optimizations. The V3D bytecode format is really a cleaner solution to this problem. There's only one compiler, so the most slightly incompatible dialects between different vendors, and it allows for some costlier data flow analysis than we would normally do. This is just an overview. There's tons of subtleties that I glossed over. For example, there's not just one scheduler, there's multiple implementations the driver can choose. And the whole issue of how synchronization between CPU and GPU is handled, I didn't explain at all so far, and so on. And I might have forgotten something important, so please tell me and I'll fix it. But now, bye, and hopefully see you next time. Graphics Pipeline 2011 Part 2. Not so fast. In the previous part I explained that various stages that your 3D rendering commands go through on a PC before they actually get handled off the GPU. Short version, it's more than you think. I then finished my main drafting of the command processor and how it actually finally does something with the command buffer ridiculously prepared. Well, how can I say this? I lied to you. We'll indeed be meeting the command processor for the first time in this installment. Remember, all this command buffer stuff goes through memory, or your system memory accessed via PCI Express, or local video memory. We're going through the pipeline order, so before we get to the command processor, let's talk memory for a second. The memory subsystem. GPUs don't have your regular memory
Aircraft, this
subsystem.
is
It's
Richmond bound
different
train.
from
We're
what
not
you see in
using.
general purpose CPUs or other hardware, because it's designed for very different usage patterns. There's two fundamental ways in which your GPU's memory subsystem differs from what you see in a regular machine. The first is that the GPU memory subsystems are fast, seriously fast. A Core i7-2600K will hit maybe 19 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth on a good day, with tailwind, downhill. The GeForce GTX 480, on the other hand, has a total memory bandwidth of close to 180 gigabytes per second, nearly an order of magnitude difference. Low. The second is that GPU memory subsystems are slow, seriously slow. A cache miss in the main memory on a Nehalem 5th generation Core i7 takes about 140 cycles to provide the memory latency as given by a Nantac by the clock rate. The GeForce GTX 480 I mentioned previously has a memory access latency of 400 to 800 trade-offs I keep hearing about in the news. Yep, GPUs get a massive increase of bandwidth and they pay for it with a massive increase of latency. And it turns out a sizable hit in power draw too, but that's beyond the scope of this article. This is part of a general pattern. GPUs are all about throughput over latency, but for results that aren't there yet, do something else instead. That's almost all you need to know about GPU memory, except that for one general DRAM tidbit that will be important later on. DRAM chips are organized into 2D grids, both logically and physically. Here we are. See you next time.